is great to be here. Thank you so much for your very warm welcome, Harold. Harold is a force of nature, and I have had the privilege of getting to know him for a number of years. And when I think of leaders in the union movement, I think of Harold Shakeberger, because we've had so many conversations about apparatus. We've had conversations about human capital. We've had conversations about how we build a Democratic Party that works for everyone. And your leadership and your forethought and your vision are why I think we have bonded so much. So thank you so much, Harold, for everything you have done. Bless you over there. Bless all of you, for that matter. I don't want to single that person out. I want to start out by saying thank you, because people often wonder, why have I had such a strong affection for the firefighters? And like everything in life, it starts very personally. When I was 12 years old, I was living in Buffalo, New York. I'm Buffalo-Minican. My family came here from the Dominican Republic. They settled in Buffalo because the weather was very similar to the weather in the Dominican Republic. At least that's what the memo said. Actually, they had to leave because there was a terrible dictator, and they got kicked out. And my dad was in the U.S. Army, and when he got out of the Army, he was in Fort McPherson, Georgia, and he got a job at the VA hospital in Buffalo, New York. And that's where my sister and I were born. And when I was 12 years old, my father passed away, died in the basement of our house of a heart attack. And what I remember most vividly about a day that was very tragic for my 4 siblings and my mother and I was the remarkable professionalism of the first responders. I remember vividly, we had a neighbor who was a cardiologist. I never ran faster in my life trying to get him, and by the time I got back 90 seconds later, the first responders were already there. And sometimes when you lose a loved one, you spend time reflecting on what could have been done differently, what could have been done better, what could have saved his life. And the honest answer was, at the time, there was nothing that could have saved his life. And it gave us so much solace as a family to know that he got the best care and treatment up until the moment of his death. And so if you're wondering why I've always had your back and tried to have your back, it's because you had my family's back from the moment I was 12 years old. And I want to say thank you to you for all of that. And, my parents taught us that, to whom much is given, much is expected. And in public service, there is no higher calling. And my roots with y'all continued in my local service, because I had the privilege of getting elected to the Montgomery County Council in 2002 and working with one of the best leaders I met at the time, John Sparks, the head of Local 1664, and now Jeff after that. And we had a tough bill in front of the council because we didn't have a fire chief at the time. And we needed to have a dedicated fire chief, and it was kind of a challenging struggle. And the right thing to do and the politics weren't always aligned. The right thing to do was to have a fire chief, and that is what you advocated for, and that's what I advocated for, and that's what we got. And as a result of that, we're a safer community. And I understood early on the importance of making sure that you have a seat at the table, because decisions on how to staff apparatus, those are life and death decisions. And I understood that because I worked at a local government level. And I worked with some of the best people I ever met. Tom Carr, the late great Tom Carr, a remarkable leader as well. And so I want to say thank you to the members of Local 1664 for what you did for me, because that was so remarkable. And you have always had my back, and I've always tried to have your back. And you know what? I have been a Democrat all my life because I believe the Democratic Party has always had the back of working families. I had the privilege of working for the likes of Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden, people who understand, as the vice president said, Firefighters make it possible for people in their community to live a basic middle-class life. And Senator Kennedy, when talking about the mission of the Democratic Party, he embodied it as well as anyone. Our cause has been the cause of the common man and the common women. Our commitment has been to the humble members of our society. Our commitment has always been to building and fortifying those basic pillars of the middle class: a fair wage for a hard day's work, education and training for you and your family, a roof over your head, and a mortgage that won't go underwater, health care that's affordable and accessible for everyone, and retirement security so you can live a dignified and secure retirement. Those have been the pillars of the middle class, and those have always been the pillars of the Democratic Party. As Dr. King once said, one of the best civil rights, regardless of what zip code you live in America, is a good job. And that is what the Democratic Party has always been about. And you aren't just fighting fires. You have been fighting for these pillars of the middle class for generations. You've been fighting for families. You've been fighting for fairness. And that is why I am so honored to be here with you today. As we look at our history of our party, we see which party brought us the Social Security Act. It was the Democrats. Which party brought us occupational safety and health, which is so critical to everyone, but particularly critical to people in this room and the members of your union, because it is life and death. You put yourself into hazardous conditions day in and day out. And without an occupational safety and health administration, we would be far worse off. And that was the Democrats. You look at Medicare, and who brought us Medicare? It was the Democratic Party. There were so many Republicans who said, you know what? Medicare will not only lead to socialism in America, it will lead to fascism in America. Look at the debates surrounding Social Security. Look at the debates surrounding Medicare. And in the years that followed the passage of those laws, opponents continued to say that the sky would be falling. And what we know now is that this is the pillar of our safety net. And that is why I am so proud to be a Democrat. But I understand that one of the basic pillars and adages of politics and of life is often, what have you done for me lately? What do you stand for today? I understand what you stood for yesterday, but what do you stand for today? And what do you stand for tomorrow? And I understand that not only did the Democratic Party not cross the finish line successfully in 2016, but when you look at the elections over the last 8 years in states across this country, Democrats have lost over 900 seats. We had far more governors 8 years ago who were Democrats than we do today. We had far more members of the United States Senate. We had 59 Democrats in the Senate in 2009. And now we have far less. So I understand that it's an important time. And I ran to be the chair of the Democratic National Committee because I understood that the Democratic Party has both a crisis of relevance and a crisis of confidence, that we have work to do, that the definition of insanity is to do the same old thing over and over again and think that this time you're going to be successful. And so I come to you today with great pride and parenthetically, great thanks for your wonderful and early support. Early support is like yeast. And your support early on was indeed remarkably important in our success in this campaign. But I come to you asking some very important questions because on a certain level, we abandon our firefighter mentality, which is that you always have to have a visible presence in communities. You always have to make house calls. You always have to be listening. And you must always lead with your values. And our failure to do these things has caused many to ask that question: has the party left me? And I'm here to say a one-word answer to that and a two-word answer to that. The one-word answer is no, and the two-word answer is hell no. The Democratic Party's values of yesterday, of Ted Kennedy, of Joe Biden, are today's and tomorrow's values of inclusion and opportunity. economic opportunity for everyone, good jobs for everyone, a secure retirement for everyone. And you know what, folks? These values are our strength, and we must lead with these values. And as we move forward, we must again remember the words of Ted Kennedy, who said in his 1980 speech at the Democratic Convention, you know, programs may sometimes become obsolete, but the idea of fairness always endures. Circumstances may change, but the work of compassion must continue. We cannot solve problems simply by throwing money at them, but it is also correct that we dare not throw out our national problems in the scrap heap of inattention and indifference. The poor may be out of political fashion, but they are not without human needs. The middle class may be angry, but they have not lost the dream that all Americans can advance together. And I believe we all can advance together if we summon some basic values. And value number one is that when unions succeed, America succeeds. When we understand the importance of the union movement, we understand the importance of America. That is the reality, my friends. I learned that once again growing up in Buffalo, New York, because after my father died, my surrogate father was a Teamster. And he taught me the importance of the union movement. When the economy went south in Buffalo, New York, his involvement and membership in the union is what helped to preserve their dignity. And so I learned that firsthand. I learned that from Senator Kennedy. And we understand that when unions succeed, America succeeds. We understand that when unions succeed, the middle class succeeds. And we understand that there are huge differences between the two parties on the labor movement. Because you look at what's happening across this country. You look what happened in Wisconsin when Governor Walker sought to eviscerate the labor movement through his ill-advised and mean-spirited collective bargaining bill. You look at what happened most recently in Iowa. Tom Harkin and Tom Vilsack, two good Democrats, would never have presided over efforts to eviscerate collective bargaining. And that's exactly what just happened under the Republican leadership in Iowa. You see what's happening or attempting to be happening in Connecticut. We see what happened in Wisconsin. We saw what happened in Ohio, and the voters of Ohio stood up, including the firefighters, and said, this will not occur in Ohio. Why? Because you know what, folks? I know a little bit about collective bargaining. And you know what? If you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. That's what I learned about collective bargaining. And you know what, folks? Things like assignments on apparatus, those things matter. Things like safety and health, those things matter. Things like retirement security. You worked your tails off under life-threatening conditions, and now your pensions are at risk as a result of these efforts to eviscerate collective bargaining. The person who has been nominated to the Supreme Court by this president is poised to be the fifth vote on that court to eviscerate public sector collective bargaining. And you know what? Some of those bills may carve out parts of firefighters, but the one thing I've learned from you all is we are all in this together. When they carved out firefighters in Wisconsin, you said, hell no, that doesn't matter. We are all in this together, and you help lead the fight against it. And that is what the union movement is about. It's about solidarity, and it's about continuing to fight these efforts. And so, folks, we have existential threats. The Vice President of the United States presided over a bill that eliminated the prevailing wage in the state of Indiana. We have seen in Wisconsin, since the passage of that bill, a 40% decline in union membership. And you know what, folks? It is not correlation that when we have strong labor union density, we have a strong middle class. America's greatest generation, who led our victories in Normandy, who led our victories in the Pacific Theater. They came back and they led the union movement, and they helped build the middle class across this country. And then over the last 40 years, we see the abiding issue of our time emerging, and that is income inequality. For 40 years post-war, workers helped bake the pie of prosperity, and they shared in that prosperity. And then starting around 1980, things began to change. And what else was happening at that time? Attacks on the labor movement, labor union density declining, and middle class security declining. We must understand, and we as Democrats must do a better job of educating our membership, that if you want to preserve income security, if you want to preserve retirement security, if you want to preserve health care security, if you want to preserve all of those pillars of the middle class, we need to have a strong union movement in this country, period, no exceptions. That's what we need, my friends. The Democratic Party understands that climate change is not a hoax. It is a real threat, and it's a real threat to first responders. I remember vividly one of the many moments when Harold educated me and was talking about the work out west that you were doing in the aftermath and in the middle of these wildfires, and the importance of understanding the root causes of climate change so we can make your jobs safer and easier under the most trying of circumstances. Democrats understand that. Democrats understand the importance of retirement security. I had the privilege of working under President Obama on one of the most important initiatives for retirement security, and that was the enactment of a regulation that does something that is very important to anyone in this room who has an IRA or a 401k. Because you know what, folks? You may not have one. You may have a defined benefit plan, but you may know others who have them. And you know what, folks? You may think that when you go to your advisor to get that advice, that he or she has a legal obligation to put your interests first. Well, if you thought that, you would be mistaken. Because unlike lawyers and doctors who have a legal and ethical obligation to put your interests first, financial advisors don't have that obligation. We worked at the Labor Department to change that. And you know what? Wall Street spent $100 million trying to defeat us, but we would not be defeated. And we enacted that. And folks, here's the thing. This is a silent one. Because you know what? If somebody can steer you into a retirement instrument that lines their pockets with fees, guess where that comes from? That comes from you. And you know what? The cost of this conflicted advice is literally in the tens of billions of dollars. And so we fix that because Democrats understand the importance of retirement security. What happened to those regulations? Literally days into his tenure, this president announced an effort to roll them back. Why? And I'm not making this up. Because his friends on Wall Street were finding it hard to comply with. I'll give you about 2 trillion reasons why they didn't want to comply, because they're making billions and billions of dollars off of you, hardworking Americans. And so what we have to do, my friends, as Democrats, is communicate our message of economic opportunity. If you want to buy a house, we want to make it easier for you to buy a house. And guess what happened? 2 or 3 hours, not 2 or 3 days, 2 or 3 hours into this administration, this president enacted an executive action to make it more expensive for first-time home buyers to buy a home by reversing executive action that President Obama had taken. So I remember that first house that we bought, 800 square feet in Rockville. And you know what? $1,000 is a big chunk of change for people looking to buy a home. I bring this up, my friends, because economic security and income inequality is the abiding issue of our time. And the Democratic Party will continue to stand for fairness and inclusion, to level the playing field. And we're seeing already, and we have to work hard to make sure that people are judged by their actions. Because the actions of this president have been inconsistent with the rhetoric in which he promised to make everybody's life better. And I need your help in looking at the facts. The Affordable Care Act, we need to fix the Cadillac tax. There's no doubt about it, my friends. We need to fix that. And there's an easy way to fix that if they were coming at this in good faith. But you should understand what they're trying to do. They want to repeal the Affordable Care Act in its entirety. And you know what, folks? Here's the dirty little secret of why they want to do it. The Affordable Care Act was financed in no small measure by a tax on very wealthy people. So you know what happens when they repeal the Affordable Care Act. Very wealthy people get a very big tax break. And guess how they're going to finance their replacement? One of the ideas that's on the table right now is to tax your health benefits. The health benefits of people who have benefits pursuant to collective bargaining. Folks, that is why we talk about the system being rigged. Because you know what, folks? The Democratic Party is going to continue to work for working families. But we've got to look at the fine print here, because the Affordable Care Act is a lifesaver. You see the consequences. It needs to be fixed. The Cadillac tax, other things about it. But they want to repeal it and give a massive tax break to the mega wealthy. That is not what this is about. That's not what fairness is about. And you deal with the consequences of people who don't have access to health care. And then you have to be helping them. And when people have access to medical care, they can be healthier. You deal with the back end. And that is why it is so important moving forward as Democrats to lead with our values. And so I leave you with this, my friends. You have always had my back, and I will always have your back. You have always had the back of working families, and the Democratic Party will always have your back. I understand that we have to earn your trust. But as I said before, we are up to that task. In the weeks and months ahead, I look forward not only to meeting with you, but to meeting with your rank and file, because I know that we have to make house calls in this job. And that's exactly what we're going to do, is make those house calls. Because when we lead with our values, and when we put our values of inclusion and opportunity and economic security for everyone into action, when you see the stark differences between what Democrats have stood for and what we continue to stand for, economic fairness in every zip code, making sure we protect our first responders, you will see that the Democratic Party of Ted Kennedy and Joe Biden and so many others continues to be the Democratic Party of the 21st century. I come to you with chronic optimism. And I come to you with chronic optimism, notwithstanding the challenges we confront, because I meet people day in and day out who need our help and got our help. What I loved about my last job in the Obama administration is that we got to help people at scale. We got to raise overtime wages for millions of people who were working hard, but the system was rigged against them. We got to make sure that people who went to work in the morning could breathe clean air in the workplace. The most important fundamental right for every worker is the right to come home safe and sound at night. There is no more fundamental right. And we fought to implement that right day in and day out. And we got sued because we were trying to do that by industry folks who said, no, you can't do that. And we said, yes, you can. You can always fight for working families. And so that was a matter of great privilege and honor to be able to serve this President Obama and to be able to help people at scale. We must go into every state party and make sure that we are making the investments in our infrastructure, making sure we are listening, making sure we're communicating that message of economic opportunity, making sure we are side by side with you, fighting efforts at state levels to eviscerate collective bargaining, because when we fight those together, we can fight more successfully. That's what we're doing. That's who the Democratic Party is. That's who the Democratic Party will be. And with your help, we will continue to make those house calls. We will continue to succeed. And we will continue to build an America in which everybody, regardless of zip code, has access to that opportunity. So thank you for your support. Thank you for your guidance. Thank you for helping my family during its most dire moments. And I hope that you will help us build a Democratic Party that works for everyone. I am not naive about the challenges that lie ahead. I know they are significant, but I also know with the help from people in this room that we can succeed in building not only a Democratic Party that works for everyone, but an America that works for everyone, because we've always been the party of hope. And when we put hope on the ballots, we win. When we allow people to put fear on the ballot and divide our communities, that's when we don't do so well. And I'm a chronic optimist, and I am confident that we can make this progress, make these investments, communicate our message of opportunity to everyone, and make sure that you are safe, sound, and secure. That's what it's all about, regardless of where you live. So thank you so much, Harold, for your leadership. Thank you for allowing me to come here today. This is the first time I have gotten to speak to a labor group as the new chair of the Democratic National Committee, and I couldn't think of a better place to choose than the firefighters. Thank you for all your work.